A few months ago, we started work on our Model A doors. We cut out the rot and removed what was left of our inner door bottoms and the outer lower door panels. Today, we're going to repair our two doors by fitting our new panels to their frames and welding them into place. We began by sandblasting the parts of the door that we planned to weld. Using our outdoor sandblaster, George blasted the lower half of the exterior facing panels of both doors and the corners of each of the door bottoms. With our new door panels here and ready to install, it was time to fine-tune our cuts to make sure each panel would fit snugly onto our doors. We've waited until we were ready to weld to shave off the last bits of steel surrounding the spaces that our panels will fit into. And to help everything go together as smoothly as possible, the inner door bottom panels would go on first. Making in the moment exact measurements of our replacement panels, we determined the precise amount of steel we would need to cut off of the existing door bottoms in order to fit the new panel in place between the lower two corners of the door frame. And truth be told, our cuts were pretty much spot on with the location of the original panel's welds. We then marked our lines with a Sharpie and began to make our cuts. Once the first side of the inner bottom door panel was cut to where we wanted it, we held the new panel in place, marked the other side of the door frame where we wanted it trimmed back to, and with the help of Mr. Pat, cut that back as well. With our opening cut to its proper length, we secured our new panel in place with a clamp on each end. With our panel in place and ready to go, Pat got to work MIG welding the seam, a spot at a time, to secure the panel to the door frame. MIG welding a door panel can't be rushed. Welding small spots, one at a time, spaced out across the expanse of the panel, helps to prevent the sheet metal from getting too hot and warping. Slowly and steadily, we connected our welds along the seams on both sides of the panel, one spot at a time, until the seam was filled in and we were satisfied that there weren't any holes. As anyone who's worked with these replacement panels before will tell you, they aren't perfect. They will need to be worked a little bit to make them fit just right.
How's that look, Pat?
I'd say that's much better.
That's more better.
That's more better.
Using a few different metal forming dollies and a body hammer, we worked the lower edges of the inner door bottom panels until they lined up to the existing corners of our door frames. Once the corner seam welds were finished, we ground them down using a grinder until they were fairly smooth and flat. With the first inner door bottom welded into place, we followed the same process and did the other one. First, beginning with cutting the proper gap for the inner door bottom panel, and then MIG welding it into place.
Right there.
Working the panels, we lined everything up just the way we wanted them, lining up the edge of the lowest part of the inner door bottom panel with the bottom corners and face of the door frame. The final step for this panel was to cut off the excess material at the bottom. Lining a straight edge up across the bottom of the door from corner to corner, we marked our cut line.
All right, so our patch panel, our bottom panel is longer than necessary, so we're going to need to shorten this up and get this nice and straight. So we'll take a straight edge, line it up with the outer edges, and then we'll mark that middle. Hold it right. Got it right there. Then we'll know how much to cut off. Okay, there you can see the line, how much is got to come off to make this door bottom nice and straight from this corner to this corner.
Next, George used a grinder to grind down the welds so that the bottom face of the panel was seamlessly smooth from end to end. Then, using our cutoff tool, George cut the thin piece of excess sheet metal off the door panel, making a straight cut from one corner to the other. With our cut complete, we used a grinder to smooth the trimmed edges of the panel so that our outer lower door replacement panels would slide on more easily. The outer lower door replacement panel comes pre-bent, with the bottom and side edges bent to slide right onto the door. But because we have a little more cutting to do on the exterior face of the door, we aren't ready to slide it on just yet. Opening up the two outside edges of the replacement panel with our body hammer and anvil will allow us the flexibility we need to push our new panel up to the exact spot that we'll want to mark and make our final cut. A 1930 two-door has doors that measure 44 inches tall. We want ours to clock in as close to that number as possible, so having precise measurements is important. With our measurements made and our line drawn, George used our cutoff tool to remove the last few inches of old material from the exterior of the door. And just like before, we used a grinder to clean up any burrs along our cut. Before placing our panel into place, we're going to use a special tool to help us get flush fabrication between our patch panels and the existing sheet metal already on our doors. Eastwood's pneumatic perfect panel prep tool helps create a perfect edge to weld to by creating a 62 thousandths of an inch 45-degree angle flange on both the edge of our replacement panels and the existing sheet metal on the face of the doors, giving us full penetration MIG spot weld connections throughout the seam. To hold our outer lower door patch panel in place and align it with the existing door panel, we're going to use some of these inner grip panel clamps. These inner grips are really simple to use and are really helpful. You simply need a small gap between the panels that you can stick the plate of the inner grip into. Then you slide the bar into the square gap of the inner grip to secure it to one side of the patch panel. On the other side is a wing nut, and when you tighten that wing nut down, it'll pull the two panels into alignment. With our inner grips holding the panels in alignment, Pat began tack welding our panels together. Moving slowly, one spaced out spot at a time, Pat began to dot his way across the panel. In order to keep the sheet metal from overheating and warping, we followed up some of our welds and wiped them down with a cool, wet rag. Slowly but surely, one pass at a time, the welds began to fill in our seam. Through the power of video editing, all this doesn't appear to take much time, but in reality, it's a slow, methodical process that shouldn't be rushed. Take the time you need to do it right, or else you'll end up with welds that you regret, or you may have to cut welds and do them again. It's important that as you weld, you check and recheck your panels for high or low spots and work those spots as needed. Once we had welded a solid section of the replacement panel to the door, we flipped the door over and began closing up the three pre-bent edges. Using the dollies and body hammer, we closed up the seam at the bottom of the first door.
There. That looks pretty, that feels pretty tight.
Once the bottom edge was done, we moved on to the two sides.
There you go. Want me to do the other side? Yep.
For good measure, we tack welded the corners to prevent any possible movement of the panels going forward. Over the course of the next hour or so, Pat filled the seams of both panels. Then it was time to grind the welds down to check for pits and holes. Any holes that we found while grinding were tacked shut and then reground until the panel was fairly flat and we were satisfied with its fit. With our door panels now welded into place, our door work, at least for now, is done. Down the road, we'll tackle door handles, hinges, and window mechanisms, but for today, this job is complete. And join us next time as we continue our journey to restore this 1930 Ford Model A on the next episode of Epic Restorations.